It was a little after 7 p.m. on a chilly autumn evening at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York. The hustle of arriving passengers filled the terminal, families reuniting, businessmen rushing, tourists hauling oversized suitcases. Among the sea of travelers stood Li Wei, a sharply dressed Chinese businessman, pulling behind him a sleek black roller bag and carrying a briefcase with a lock clasped tight. At the same time, across the pickup lane, an Uber driver named Marcus Hill waited in his dented Toyota Camry. Marcus was a 39-year-old father of two, worn down by years of financial strain. His Uber app pinged, showing his next passenger, a pickup from Terminal 4. That passenger was Li Wei. Marcus pulled forward, popped the trunk, and greeted him with the practiced smile of someone who had said, "Welcome to New York," 1,000 times before. Li Wei barely acknowledged him, speaking curtly in broken English, "Hotel Mandarin, Manhattan." The ride began. Inside the car, the atmosphere was quiet. Li Wei scrolled on his phone, occasionally speaking in Mandarin through a headset. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. But he noticed the briefcase, polished leather, sitting on the seat beside the man, never leaving his sight. The ride lasted 45 minutes, through traffic-clogged expressways into the bright sprawl of Manhattan. At the hotel entrance, Li Wei thanked Marcus softly, handed him a generous tip, and disappeared into the revolving doors. Marcus drove off, sighing at another uneventful fare. But 10 minutes later, he heard a faint thump in the back seat. At a red light, he glanced back and froze. The briefcase was still there. At first, Marcus thought it was just a laptop or some documents. But curiosity gnawed at him. He pulled into a dark side street, heart pounding, and placed the briefcase on the passenger seat. It was heavier than he expected. With trembling fingers, he worked the clasp, and to his shock, it wasn't locked. Inside were bundles of $100 bills, tightly wrapped, row after row. Marcus' jaw dropped. He pulled out a stack, counting quickly. It was real. The bills smelled of ink and paper, crisp and untouched. He counted again, estimating. His breath caught in his throat. $1.5 million. For a long moment, Marcus sat in stunned silence. His mind raced. He thought of his overdue rent, his mother's hospital bills, his credit card debt. He thought of his children's shoes, their Christmas lists, the eviction notices piling on the counter. All his problems, gone if he kept this. But then came the fear. Who leaves $1.5 million in a briefcase? Was it criminal money? Drug cartel? Money laundering? If someone was careless enough to leave it, they'd be ruthless enough to come looking for it. Marcus considered turning it into the hotel. But what if the businessman denied it was his? What if corrupt employees took it? And more chilling, what if this wasn't an accident at all? That night, Marcus drove home with the briefcase still beside him, his mind torn between panic and possibility. He didn't tell his girlfriend. He didn't tell his friends. He barely slept. By the next morning, news had already broken. Mysterious businessman reports missing briefcase in Manhattan, believed to contain important documents. No mention of cash. Just documents. Marcus realized instantly someone was lying. By the afternoon, strange things began happening. A black SUV with tinted windows lingered near his apartment. His Uber app mysteriously froze, locking him out of new rides. A blocked number called his phone, leaving no voicemail. Marcus' paranoia grew by the hour. The money wasn't just valuable, it was dangerous. And what Marcus decided to do next didn't just change his own life. It triggered a chain of events that would shock the city, dominate headlines, and draw in both federal investigators and international attention. Because Marcus Hill, the broke Uber driver, didn't return the briefcase. He had a different plan. Marcus had always seen himself as a decent man. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't greedy. He was a survivor. And staring at that money in his living room, he convinced himself of one thing. Maybe fate had finally given him a break. But Marcus wasn't reckless. Instead of spending the cash, he hatched a plan. He went online, diving into forums about offshore accounts, cryptocurrency laundering, and anonymous banking. Within days, he purchased small amounts of Bitcoin using the cash, testing how easily he could move funds without leaving a trail. But every move he made left breadcrumbs. Meanwhile, authorities were already circling. Li Wei wasn't just a businessman, he was under quiet surveillance by the FBI. The briefcase, it turned out, was bait in a larger money laundering investigation tied to international fraud networks. When Marcus kept the case instead of reporting it, he unknowingly stepped right into the middle of a federal sting. The SUV outside his apartment? Federal agents. The blocked calls? Surveillance tests. But before law enforcement could close in, Marcus made his own shocking move. 3 days after finding the briefcase, Marcus walked into the New York Times building with a backpack. Inside wasn't all of the money, but a portion, about $500,000. He asked to speak to an investigative journalist. On record, Marcus revealed everything: the forgotten briefcase, the $1.5 million, his fears about corruption, and his suspicion that the man he drove wasn't a simple businessman. The story exploded. Headlines across the country blared. Uber driver discovers $1.5 million briefcase, turns whistleblower. Cash, crime, and corruption. Mysterious Chinese mogul exposed. Hero or thief? The Uber driver who shook the FBI. Federal authorities scrambled to respond. The FBI seized the remaining money from Marcus' apartment, but his testimony and the publicity complicated everything. Li Wei's lawyers demanded the return of the money, claiming it was legitimate business capital. The FBI insisted it was dirty cash tied to shell companies and illicit transfers. And in the middle stood Marcus, the driver who had set off an international scandal. The public was divided. Some hailed Marcus as a hero for refusing to quietly hand back the money and instead exposing the suspicious circumstances. Others condemned him, calling him reckless for tampering with evidence and trying to move some of the funds before going public. The FBI, pressured by the media, decided not to prosecute Marcus heavily. Instead, they charged him with minor financial misconduct for the Bitcoin transfers, but the sentence was lenient. In exchange, Marcus became a key witness in the case against Li Wei. The case dragged on for months, with dramatic courtroom revelations. Documents tied Li Wei to laundering schemes worth hundreds of millions, stretching across multiple countries. The briefcase wasn't just a mistake, it was an intentional drop, part of a network of couriers moving dirty money. But none of that mattered to Marcus' neighbors. To them, he wasn't just another struggling Uber driver anymore. He was the man who had stumbled into a fortune, risked it all, and dared to go public when everyone else would have stayed silent. In the end, Marcus never kept the $1.5 million. But what he did keep was a legacy. Podcasts, documentaries, and talk shows dissected his story. Netflix approached him for adaptation rights. And despite all the chaos, one fact remained undeniable. What Marcus Hill did next, after finding that briefcase, truly shook everybody. Because he didn't just keep the money. He turned it into a weapon against the very system that had left him behind.